You're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. And it lies between the pit of one's fears and the summit of one's knowledge. You are now traveling through a dimension of imagination. You just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Anthology presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and if this is your first time listening, Anthology is one man's examination of the Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer. Each podcast I share my first impressions, analysis, and overall thoughts on Rod Serling's iconic series, one episode at a time. However, in this bonus episode series, I will be reviewing the 2019 Twilight Zone reboot produced by Jordan Peele and Simon Kinberg and hosted by Jordan Peele on CBS All-Access. You can find more of Anthology as well as a full episode archive at anthologypod.com. And if you want to contact me, you can use the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod, tweet me at OVAnthologypod, or send an email to matt@obsessiveviewer.com. Today on the podcast, I'll be discussing Replay. It's the third episode of the Twilight Zone's first season on CBS All-Access. It premiered on the streaming platform on April 11th, 2019. And before I do that, I actually have some feedback and some pre-review notes to go through. So yeah, I'll go ahead and get into that now. Listener Monica, who has been supporting the podcast for a long time, actually all of the podcasts really, not to brag, but she did say at one point that Anthology is her favorite podcast. So, if that's still the case, thank you so much. And if not, I'll try to be better. So anyway, that was a weird, transition. So Monica wrote, she wrote to me about The Comedian, the first episode of The Twilight Zone. So here's what Monica wrote. She said, quote, "So about the new Twilight Zone episode, The Comedian. First, I want to say that I was and am so excited for this reboot and got CBS All-Access just for it. And I'm not the type that hates on remakes. I actually love them. I never understand why people, I never understand people who complain about them like it somehow takes away from the original. Anyway, I didn't much like this episode. I noticed the things you talked about, like them referencing things that like they should already be known with no context. But I just didn't feel much connection to the characters, and sometimes it all just felt silly. I did like any time they showed that wall with all the people's faces on it. In the beginning, you get a good shot of some of the faces, and they look kind of creepy. It looked like some of them were distorted due to them not being lined up right, or that maybe some of the paper got bunched up and just made some creepy-looking faces. But I just kind of hope they put this one first to get the worst out of the way first. I did notice the lighting in the apartment that you talked about. That was really cool. I liked the effect. It's creepy and chaotic. It reminds me a bit of what they did in Bandersnatch during the acid part, because that actually happens on LSD. Those strange lighting changes that seem to happen for no reason." End quote. So, thank you, Monica, for writing in. And she said that she also watched Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, but she wasn't sure if I had seen it yet, because at that point I had only released the first episode. So, definitely let me know what you thought of Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, Monica. I can't wait to hear what you say. And to all the other listeners, write in. Let me know what you think of the new episodes and everything. I'm really, excited that we have this show now. So, let me know what you guys think. You know where to find me. So some pre-review notes, some kind of not feedback, but some notes about the previous episodes. First of all, actually this kind of goes into feedback thing. Gregory Tyson on Twitter, at Gregory Tyson 13, he wrote, "The Comedian was a solid 7. No, it didn't set up the reboot as well as Whereas Everybody set up the original Twilight Zone, and its length and coarse language, which feels shoehorned in, frankly, are drawbacks, but it has the teasy feel, which is not easy to capture." I just wanted to put that out there, because I really enjoy Gregory's, Twitter feed. If you're on Twitter and you like the Twilight Zone, definitely follow Greg at Gregory Tyson 13. The guy lives and breathes Twilight Zone, and he has a lot of cool insight. He's emailed into the podcast before, and it's always a treat when I hear from him. So check him out on Twitter at Gregory Tyson 13. So one correction for my review of The Comedian. I said that Kumail Nanjiani won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. Kind of funny, I was wrong. But he lost the Best Original Screenplay Oscar to Jordan Peele, who won for Get Out in the Oscar race. So that was cool. Just a little correction there, and kind of a fun kind of coincidence. And so a couple of kind of critiques of the comedian that I wanted to bring up. Kind of, this is just broad critiques that people have brought up across the internet. I don't remember per se if I brought them up in the episode, so I'll be brief. But the first one is that the whole argument that there was an argument, not argument, but there was a backlash or what have you. There was a vocal piece of the fan community of the Twilight Zone who said that they were put off by the comedian's kind of forced political messages, or they felt like it was just, too political. And like there are different extremes that you can go with that and everything. So I'm not saying everyone who said like, oh, the show was too political. I'm not saying what I'm about to say because of like just a blanket statement. I'm just saying that the people who specifically said like the show is too political, I don't think I'm going to watch it. I saw like a few comments of people saying that they didn't like the politics in the first episode, so they're not going to watch the series. What? It's that kind of bothered me a little bit, because the whole point of the Twilight Zone is to have like this social commentary and everything. The reason that Rod Serling created the Twilight Zone was because he was being censored when he wrote dramatic scripts that had social commentary and like included references to current issues of the time, and he was being censored because they didn't want to have that on there. So he did that he created the Twilight Zone to have those messages play out in a science fiction platform. That's the whole reason. And there are tons of political like episodes that take like a political idea and do that. Like my favorite episode so far, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. It is about McCarthyism and the Red Scare and blacklisting writers and everything, and it's told through this prism of science fiction. That's the whole point. But and that, like, everyone knows that's what the Twilight Zone is. And I don't know, the people saying that the show in The Comedian was too political, I think what they're getting at is that the Kumail's character's opening kind of bit about the Second Amendment is what turned them away and put them off. Also, the whole fascist, the president is fascist who should be strung up by his balls, bit. Like, those two are what kind of got the ire of some people that watched the show, because they felt like it was a specific attack on the people who support the Second Amendment or people who support Donald Trump. I don't either. I mean, I don't support either of those. So I didn't take offense to it or anything. And I also went on record on the podcast saying that I thought that the Second Amendment bit was kind of a good bit. And that's my cross to bear, because apparently everyone hated it. In terms of comedy. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that this is the reason why the Twilight Zone, I feel, should have been rebooted, and why the Twilight Zone should exist in this time in America and world history, essentially. Because if you watch, like, what I don't get is people who watch the show and right off the bat, it's like, oh, the Second Amendment. People who don't want to have gun control regulated are spouting about how the Second Amendment, it's against the Second Amendment, even though the Second Amendment says it's a well-regulated militia. That makes logical sense and everything. But if you support the Second Amendment and you saw that bit and you thought, oh, this show's too political, they're just forcing their political views, their liberal agenda into the episode. I'm not going to watch it anymore. That, I think, is a great, like, metaphor for the world we're in today. Like, we're in a world where, if someone disagrees with your politics, you will just shut down. Like, I'm talking both sides of everything, like every side of the political argument. It's like, since we're in this outrage Twitter culture where you can just spout off anything in like 30 seconds and then like let it go, there's no like discourse, there's no like actual discussion or anything. And it's just, it bothers me that like we live in a time where someone can watch a piece of art that makes reference to something in a negative manner that they support, and that will cause a reaction that's like, oh, I don't want to watch this. They're just shutting down completely. They're not going to think about it critically or move past it, since it's a small piece of the episode. Anyway, I'm getting away from myself, and if I keep talking more, I'll dip into my review of Replay, because there's a lot of political stuff in Replay that I really want to talk about. So anyway, I just think that that's an interesting reflection of the society that we're in today, that, you know, an episode of television can have a brief reference to one side of the political argument, and the other side of that political argument will, a small portion of that side of the political argument, I should say, will take that and say, I'm not going to watch this at all. Full on boycott. I don't get it. I think that that's a sad statement on the world we're in today. Second point about the comedian is that people were saying, like, a big, I don't know if I'd say a big point of contention or a big criticism or observation that people made was that the comedian didn't have good comedy, which I agree. Like, at best, it was media. Like I said, like, some of the bits are kind of funny at the beginning. I'm not saying I'm howling with laughter at them. Like, they got a sensible chuckle out of me. But I feel like some people may have missed the point, and I mentioned this in the episode where I reviewed it, that it's not supposed to have good comedy. It's not, like, the whole point of him having this power is that he can say anything as long as he, like, references someone in his life. That's what will get him the success and laughs and everything. It's a metaphor. I don't know. It kind of seems like some people kind of miss the point there, and I just wanted to kind of highlight that. Moving on, Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, some notes about that. I mentioned that the pilot's name was Captain Donner, and I mentioned that Joe Donner was a character in The Comedian. Completely missed the fact that the name of the pilot in Nightmare at 30,000 Feet is a reference to Richard Donner, who was the director of the original series episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet from season 5 of the original Twilight Zone. Which, understandable that I missed that, because I haven't seen Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, given the whole setup of this entire podcast. But anyway, moving on. I mentioned that I thought that the podcast host name in Nightmare at 30,000 Feet was maybe a reference to Serling. Of course it is. I feel like such an idiot. The podcast host's name is Rodman Edwards, and of course Rod Serling's full name was Rodman Edward Serling, so obviously that is a direct reference to Rod Serling. And I am stupid. Also, another Easter egg that I didn't catch was that Jordan Peele, during his closing narration, you can see that he's wearing a bracelet when he picks up the MP3 player on the beach. It is a replica of the paratrooper bracelet that Rod Serling always wore. So that's interesting. And then my final part about Nightmare at 30,000 Feet is that is about the ending. So Tom Elliott, who hosts the spectacular the Twilight Zone podcast, he has been what he's doing, and I think this is fantastic, is like he is inviting his listeners to record audio and submit it to the show and have feedback for every episode. I'm hoping that I have time to record a brief one to send over to him today after this recording. But anyway, one of his listeners on the episode, the feedback episode for Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, really had a really brilliant take on the episode. I can't remember what the guy's name was. Go listen to that episode, though. It's really fantastic. Briefly, what I'll say is that he basically saw the episode as a metaphor. It was a mirror to modern journalism and the way that people, like investigative journalism in particular, has a responsibility to be the fourth branch of the government, has a responsibility to basically uncover what's harmful and expose it and everything. And throughout the episode, Justin Sanderson is an investigative journalist who is trying to uncover this mystery that is happening on the plane. And he is failing continuously each time. He is failing spectacularly throughout the episode, and he ends up bringing down the plane while trying to investigate this thing and trying to expose what's going on. The ending, that I feel like there was a lot of kind of confusion or disappointment with the ending. What Tom Elliott's listener pointed out was that that's first of all, that's the end of civility in general, and it's also that ending, and it makes it so much more powerful to me, that the ending of the episode where the passengers all go after Justin on the beach, that is a metaphor for society kind of going after journalists. We're in an era where there's like people spouting off that there's fake news and everything and completely discrediting the media and everything. What I kind of extrapolated from Tom Elliott's listener, his analysis of the episode, is that ending felt like the passengers were like the American people or the public in general. And they are attacking the journalist, either on one hand, just thinking that it's fake news and completely just attacking their ideals and everything, a lot like the people who had problems with the comedian. But on the other hand, it's them saying that, hey, you failed us. You failed us as a society. You had a responsibility to uncover the truth and to protect us from evil and from horrible things, and you failed, and that's why we're going after you. I just thought that kind of analysis, that thought process through it was absolutely just beautiful. I thought it was a brilliant take on it, and going back and rewatching Nightmare at 30,000 Feet really put it into a unique perspective for me, and really made me just appreciate the episode all the more. And I really enjoyed the episode in general, so that just kind of elevated it for me. No pun intended. So all that out of the way, let's talk about Replay. I can't wait to talk about this. This was a great episode. So let's go into the plot summary just real quick. According to CBS All-Access's plot summary is: Nina's old camcorder can rewind time, but can it help her ensure the future of her college-bound son, Dorian? Just so you know, I'm going to be spoiling Replay throughout this review, so if you haven't seen Replay, go check it out on CBS All-Access. Come back and listen to this review. So spoilers on for Replay starting now. So talent rundown: this episode stars, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounce the names, Sanaa Lathan as Nina Harrison. She has had several acting credits. She was in the movie that's releasing this year, Native Son, which I think was a big hit at Sundance this year. She was also in 20 episodes of The Affair. She was also the star of the Netflix film Napoli Ever After, and she also appeared in the Dylan O'Brien spy thriller vehicle, American Assassin, 1 or 2 years ago, with Michael Keaton was in it too. But anyway, that's an interesting kind of weird connection, because Dylan O'Brien actually appears in the first episode of Weird City, which is a YouTube series, YouTube original series that's produced by Jordan Peele and Win Rosenfield, I think is his name, who obviously produced Twilight Zone. And it's also kind of it's a half-hour sci-fi anthology series that's more comedic than anything. I watched like 3 or 4 episodes of it. It's solid. It's okay. And I'm trying to figure out how to review it on the podcast. I might do like a one-off like season review of it after I finish the Twilight Zone bonus reviews, but I don't know. We'll see. But it's on YouTube. Go check it out if it's on YouTube Red, I think is what it's called, YouTube Premium, whatever it's called. But check it out there. And I think the first episode is actually free. But anyway, co-starring as Dorian Harrison is Damson Idris, who appeared in the movies Megan Levy and The Commuter. And Glenn Fleshler plays Officer Lasky, who has worked in a a bunch of HBO stuff. He's in the HBO series Barry with Bill Hader. He was in season 1 of True Detective, and he was in several episodes of Boardwalk Empire. And rounding out the cast is Steve Harris as Neil. He previously worked with director Gerard McMurray on the movie The First Purge. He was also in Justified, Friday Night Lights, the TV show, and the 90s teen suspense thriller The Skulls, which I don't know, that I was just thinking about that movie recently, so it's weird that it kind of cropped up here, but that movie was, I don't know, it had Joshua Jackson and Paul Walker about secret societies at a college. It was, I don't know, I haven't seen it in several years, but I don't know. It was kind of fun when I saw it in the 90s. Writer for this episode is Selwyn Seifu Hines. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is actually his first writing credit, according to IMDb, at least for TV and film, but he did contribute to the sci-fi anthology comic book anthology Strange Adventures from Vertigo and DC Comics. He contributed the story Case 21. I haven't read it. I think it's from, it was released in February of 2014. I haven't read it, but I did just order it on Amazon, so I'll report back in a future episode. And rounding out the talent rundown is director Gerard McMurray. He wrote and directed, I should say, Burning Sands, which was a Netflix movie from 2017. I think it was about, hazing and fraternities. I haven't seen it, but it's on Netflix, so check it out. He also directed The First Purge, and he was a producer on Fruitvale Station. Okay, so let's talk about Replay. My initial thoughts after my first viewing, the way that I do this, these bonus reviews is I watch the episode once just to watch it and enjoy it like a human being. And then the second, third time I watch it, I take notes throughout the viewing and compile those notes and have a 16-page PDF file in front of me to go through it. It's not really 16 pages. The font's really big. But anyway, so my initial thoughts after my first viewing of Replay was, first of all, I thought it was a just beautiful piece of television. Thought-provoking, intense, very powerful, and it's exactly why the Twilight Zone needs to exist. It's the embodiment of what I feel the message of the Twilight Zone should be. I'll get into more specifics in a bit, but when they talk about rebooting the Twilight Zone, bringing it back for a modern audience, there are things here and there that they can do, shouldn't do, won't do, or did and shouldn't have done, whatever. But there's a lot of conversation about that. But at its heart, what I think the Twilight Zone represents, from my perspective, is that it's a reflection of our modern times in a science fiction setting. It is telling these stories about humanity and about how we treat each other as human beings and how we interact with each other through the prism of science fiction. And we're in a time, like I've said before, we're at a time where where the conversation about politics, about social justice, whatever, about just like our society as a whole. Like, I'm not just talking just, America, but just around the world. Like, people, the conversations are volatile. It's really just at a really volatile, like, point. And it's just, everything is so amped up to 11. Everyone thinks they're right about everything and is unwilling to even consider any alternate opinions and everything. I mean, for God's sakes, they think that, like, the second that an episode of television, badmouths their right to bear arms, they are ready to write off the entire season of television, the entire reboot. But anyway, having an episode like Replay that takes such an important topic as the Black Lives Matter movement and police brutality and just institutional racism and puts it into this this framework of the Twilight Zone is exactly why the Twilight Zone needs to exist. And that's exactly why this is an important time for the Twilight Zone to exist. And I was just blown away by it. On the flip side of that, my initial thoughts after the first viewing was that I was bracing myself for how people who dislike the politics of the comedian were going to respond to this. And honestly, I am recording this Saturday the 13th. I'm really hoping to get this episode posted today, but I might not get it posted tonight. That's neither here nor there because you're listening to it right now and it's in the future. But anyway, I'm recording this Saturday, April 13th. This episode came out Thursday, the 11th, and I didn't have time to watch it before work, so I spent the entire day at work just waiting to go home and watch it. So I watched it immediately after work, and my plan was I was okay, I get off work at 3:30, race home, eat some dinner, watch it twice, record an episode, release it for Friday. That was my plan. I watched this episode one time, and I just sat with it, and I was like, I was so naive to think that I could just watch this episode twice and then be ready to just pump out an episode of the podcast, because this is an episode that needs to sit with you. And that's why it's Saturday afternoon and I'm finally recording this episode after having watched this episode probably 6 or 7 times. Anyway, those were my initial thoughts. And let's dive into my review of Replay. So right off the bat, the opening scene, we see the logo for Busy Bee Diner, which is a direct reference to the episode from Season 2, Nick of Time, with Bill Shatner. Season 2, Episode 7. And so we go inside the diner and we see Nina and Dorian, mother and son, talking in the diner. It's revealed that that basically Nina is taking Dorian to college. He's leaving for college. He has freshman orientation the next day. All of the dialogue is a little exposition heavy. Just like, it's like in that we are front loaded with, we're loaded up with so much information. Like he's going away to college. She didn't have anyone that, helped get her into college. She had to do everything on her own. And it's important to her that he has the opportunities that she didn't have. And even down to the fact that, they didn't sign up, or they signed up for his classes later or earlier, and they need to go for orientation the next morning. Like all of that is just kind of exposition heavy, but it didn't detract from it just strictly because of the chemistry between these two actors. I thought they were great. They were fantastic. The chemistry and the writing is so strong. Like when Nina says that she only helped herself, like she took herself to college. It was just, she was the one that helped herself to get into college and everything. And she says, it was just me, myself, and I. And then, that's important, background for the character. But then Dorian just says, safety in numbers. It's just like this kind of playful kind of thing, in the dialogue that I really appreciated. And then they get into the whole conversation about Uncle Neil and how he said that her father was proud of her, and she kind of says, how do you know what he would say? And he says, he was corresponding with him on Facebook. And in that, that gives us more information, because it's not just that she did everything on her own and she left home to go to college and she worked hard to get herself into college and everything. It's that she completely removed herself from her family, essentially. So she hasn't had any contact with her family in the years since she left home. So that's important backstory that'll come into play later. But then we get in this scene, we get flashes of a woman spilling sugar, which I thought would be more prominent in the episode. And I'm really glad it wasn't overused. It's such a, I don't want to say contrivance, but it's something that seems kind of a staple of this type of story, where you have a story that is about time travel in no uncertain terms, where you're literally going back in time and replaying the same thing, a Groundhog Day kind of thing. So having a woman just spilling a whole thing of sugar on the table or on the counter is just kind of like a trope of that type of story. And it's, I don't know, I'm glad that, like I said, I'm glad that they didn't overuse it, because it could have been a little, I don't know, annoying. but they did it well, so I appreciated that. So Nina whips out this old camcorder, and they're kind of playing with the camcorder there. Dorian gives her some playful kind of pushback, like, why do you want to use this old camcorder? Why don't you use your phone like everyone in this century? And she has this nice moment where it's like, this camcorder recorded your first steps, and it's going to record your first steps into college. And he's like, I love the dialogue is so clean, or so well done, and the chemistry is so great, because he's like, yeah, I've heard that before, blah, blah, blah. It's just kind of a playful, like, back and forth between them. I really appreciated their performances in this episode. So at this point, Officer Lasky comes in. We get the introduction of Officer Lasky, and that's when I really like that. That's when we see the Mystic Seer. There's a Mystic Seer just on the counter and everything. It's not overt or anything. I just like that it's there. It was featured prominently in the trailers and everything. We get a couple shots of it in the episode. It's not overdone. I appreciate it for that. And then we get even another Nick of Time reference on top of that, when Lasky goes up to the counter and Mabel says, like, oh, hey, what'll it be? Will you have like a sandwich or eggs or whatever? And he says, this is a chicken fried steak kind of day, which I really like that, because in Nick of Time, the owner of the Busy Bee in Nick of Time was kind of, it wasn't pushy, but there were a couple scenes in that episode where he tried to get the couple to order the chicken fried steak. So I like that as an Easter egg for the original series. So after he orders his food, Lasky sits down at the counter, and we see in the background, we see in focus, we see Nina and Dorian kind of goofing off. Nina has the camcorder pointed at Dorian, and she says, so this is for the behind the scenes of the film Dorian Goes to College. And I really like the way that this shot is set up. So we, the audience, like the camera that's shooting the actual episode, is positioned right by Lasky, where Lasky's sitting, and we see Lasky is in the foreground. He's out of focus, and in the background we see Nina and Dorian in focus, and we can clearly see, like, the audio is clear that she is speaking at a volume where where the camera is positioned, where we are, can hear it. So Lasky can hear her say that Dorian is going to college. And I kind of feel like that kind of demonstrates, or it can be read as Lasky, like the reason for Lasky's grudge against them. I kind of feel like that's supposed to signify that Lasky holds this grudge against this young black family, because the young black man is going to college, and he's not what the kind of racist institution views of a young black man. I don't know. I just feel like that was kind of a profound, kind of powerful kind of statement. So I kind of feel like, in general, like, this episode as a whole achieves a certain level of brilliance in my eyes with the kind of symbolism at play. So Officer Lasky is... This isn't a simple story of a police officer that's racist going after a young black family. It's more, I don't want to say subtle, because the symbolism is kind of overt, but it's more symbolic than that. It's more metaphorical. So Officer Lasky represents institutional racism, authority figures dead set on keeping black people oppressed, like the idea of racism, how it is pervasive in our culture, and its goal is to keep non-white people in a place that's lower than what white people are at, through the prism of racism, essentially. Like, it's about people keeping other people down. In here, in this episode, Lasky, the representative of racism in our society and our culture, he is literally preventing Dorian from becoming an educated black man. He's literally preventing Dorian from going to college, where he wants to study film and everything. He is trying to keep Dorian, like, down, essentially. And it's just like this whole kind of structure, the symbolic nature of this entire structure has so many applications in our society, sadly. Like, the whole Oscar so white controversy, like the idea of minority directors and minority storytellers in film and television not being represented and everything. Like it's a powerful statement that goes even beyond like the more tragic and horrific story of Black Lives Matter and actual like Black people being gunned down and violence against minorities. Like there's so many different things to this, and that's why I think this episode is important and brilliant in the way that it depicts it, because it is telling this story in such a unique way that should be a reflection of society, and that's what the Twilight Zone is, and that's why I love this episode so much. So back to the booth with Nina and Dorian, and Nina's kind of, they're joking around, and she says that he's going to be the next Ryan Coogler, which I dug that reference. I liked it a lot. So Ryan Coogler, of course, directed Black Panther and Fruitvale Station and Creed. God, his work in Creed is great. Anyway, so Dorian is eating his food and everything, squirts the ketchup bounces up, hits him in the shirt, same spot he gets shot later in the episode, which is fine. It's not a very subtle thing. I don't know. It's kind of weird the way that the ketchup bounces on him, but it's fine. It's a fine visual reference. Okay, so when he squirts ketchup on himself, and she says that about, he says like, wait, were you filming that? You need to rewind it, and they kind of wrestle for the camcorder. So they hit rewind, and that's when we get our Twilight Zone effect. That's when we get our entrance into the Twilight Zone, in a to a certain extent. I like the effect of the rewind. It's loud, and the detail of the visuals isn't hokey at all. It's a rewind effect, but it's not like that kind of rewind thing. It's like a loud kind of imposing rewind effect that I liked. So we get the rewind. Nina is confused and like wondering what the hell happened. And then we get Peele's narration where he says, presenting Nina Harrison, a woman who left her past behind to provide a better future for her son. I'm loving Peele's narrations in these episodes. Like, he has that tone and that stature just really down. It's really great. I kind of wasn't crazy about him reading the paper as he's saying it. Like, if you think back to Nick of Time, Serling is just sitting at the booth. He's talking directly to the camera. Like, I think in most, if not all, of his on-screen narrations, at least in season 2 that I've seen, he's looking directly at us and everything. But I just, that's a minor gripe. It's not even a gripe. It's just an observation, really. But he looks up and he said, like, when he says that she's going down a road in the Twilight Zone, when he says in the Twilight Zone, that's when he looks up. So I dug that. So, coming off of the first episode of the show, The Comedian, and kind of like how most of those scenes were set in a darkly lit comedy club, and then the kind of claustrophobic space of Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, like coming off of those 2 episodes and going into Replay, it feels kind of nice to see these wide open exteriors in the episode. Like, it's kind of gorgeous. We see, like, there are a lot of wide shots of just planes, not like airplanes, but like plane, geography, and just empty roads that they're traveling on. I love that. I thought that it looked really good. One of the opening scenes is there's a mile marker for 8 Mile, and I don't know what that is a reference to. The only reference I can glean from it is Eminem's movie 8 Mile, which is about a man who's working hard to kind of elevate his life and to an extent, like, you get to a better life than he has now. So maybe that's what they're saying there. it's revealed in the car that Nina is a lawyer, just kind of in a passing conversation where she says that how come I can win all my cases in court, but I can't win a case with you or win an argument with you. That's fine. It's interesting that 2 episodes have lawyers, but it doesn't come into play in the episode at all, so that's fine. It's revealed that Dorian set the GPS to take them to his Uncle Neil's, and that causes a kind of a bit of an argument between Nina and Dorian. Nina opposes it. She hasn't been back home in a long time, and it took a lot for her to, quote, get out of there. Dorian wants to see his family. He wants to meet his family, or he wants to see his family, because it's been so long. At this point, they pass a sign for Earlysville, which no idea if that's a reference to anything in the Twilight Zone. If it is, go ahead and let me know, because I'm at a loss. But we see a couple signs for Earlysville, and it's not like a reference that I can glean. So yeah. But anyway, going back to the car, Dorian says that he hasn't seen Uncle Neil since Kaepernick took the Niners to the Super Bowl, and I kind of love that, because this episode is all about the Black Lives Matter movement and everything. It's an episode that's born from that movement, and having a reference to Colin Kaepernick, who has been famously, kneeling during the national anthem in the NFL, and that's caused just a lot of conversation and outrage in our society here. That's just, I don't know. I'm curious how the people that were complaining about politics in the first episode, how they take that reference in this episode, as a whole, because there's a whole thing, and it's aggravating, to not put it lightly. Or to put it lightly, it's aggravating to say, like, people saying, like, oh, he's disrespecting the troops by kneeling during the national anthem, which is, it is 100% inaccurate. It is just, he's making a peaceful statement about, a peaceful political statement, and people blow it up into something that it's not, because people are incapable of, there are certain people in our society who are incapable of reflecting on what the actions of others are saying, and instead take it as a direct, even if it's peaceful, they take it as an aggression on their values and on the country as a whole. It's just absolutely ridiculous to me. But anyway, yeah, so I love that they got that reference into the episode, and I'm curious to hear what other people say about it, because I don't actually know if I said this earlier in the recording or not. I haven't listened to any podcasts on this episode. I haven't looked up any reviews or any Twitter responses or anything, so I am recording this in a vacuum. I don't know what people are saying about Replay. But I'm going to check out the reviews and everything as soon as I finish recording this. So anyway, they're in the car. Dorian picks up the camera and starts filming his mom, and it gives some additional backstory or background to their story and everything. And that's when Lasky stops them. And I really like the timing of that. Like, the timing of the siren it's perfect, because Dorian, as he's holding the camera and filming Nina, he's saying that, basically what he's saying is that what do you think the effect of not seeing my family for so long, how do you think that's affected me becoming a young black man in America? And as soon as he says that, that's when the siren whoops and we see that Lasky's pulling them over. I don't know. I love the timing of that. It's really kind of clever, storytelling. So they pull over, and Lasky's walking up to the window. First of all, as he's getting out of the car, Nina tells Dorian, remember, like we talked about, no attitude, be respectful. And she's clearly, like, nervous. She's unsettled. She has so much fear and anxiety, and with good reason. Like, she has devoted her life to her son, and her deepest fear is losing him. And she knows that, police, there is this law enforcement and people in authority look down on, African Americans in our society. That's what her perspective is, and she is terrified anytime like Lasky comes up. So, I think it's interesting how their dynamics reverse later in the parking lot scene, which I'll get to later. But for right now, basically, Nina's position is just be respectful, just like listen to him, like be respectful, don't give him attitude and everything. Whereas Dorian is more of a, he's someone who's like, okay, well, he's not questioning the authority, he's questioning the logic of it. Like, there's no reason for him to, like, later on in the motel, there's no reason for him to need their ID or anything. Like, there's not reason for it. He's calling him out for that. So anyway, what I think this episode demonstrates spectacularly well is the generational shift in how these characters approach racism. Like, Nina is a non-confrontational person in most of her scenes with Lasky, and she's fearful because she has seen what racism can do. She's traumatized by it. She knows that there is this energy within the culture that a white man could easily murder her son and be like perfectly fine with that, or could shoot her son. Like, the escalation of a scene between her, Dorian, and Lasky could end up with Dorian being killed, as it does later in the episode. And she is traumatized by that thought. Dorian, on the other hand, is young, and he has lived through the beginning of this revolution of sorts. Like, he's coming of age in a time where video recording exists in our pockets and everything, and there is a certain accountability that, in theory, should be held for law enforcement and for these institutions of racism in our society, no matter what it is. Like, there is in theory an accountability. So Dorian has this on his side, where he is willing to call out these transgressions by Lasky. And so I just love that dynamic, and it comes into play later in the episode as well, which I'll get to. But anyway, so as Lasky's walking up to the car, the way that he touches the car on his way up, like the back, like fender and window, he kind of glides his hand over it on his way up. It feels like this subtle admiration, when you put it into context with the later scene where he is asking how she got the car. You can maybe kind of extrapolate that to being like Lasky having this sense of unwarranted ownership of the car, like his behavior, his thought process, the character's thought process is, and again, Lasky is a representative of this racist world, like the unchecked institutional racism of our society. So his thought process as that personification is, they're black, I'm white, therefore this should be mine and not theirs. And so like that, like I love the subtleness of that. Maybe I'm reaching, maybe I'm overthinking it, but I love that that's the impression that I get from that. And it's kind of powerful and subtle and just beautifully done. So Lasky does his whole police, like, how's it going? Or not how's it going? It's not casual. It's like very robotic and everything. Nina tells him that she's taking Dorian to college, and then Lasky's immediate response is the black college up there. And like the casualness and the condescension of that, and the underlying tone of, like, it's almost like he's like the kind of underlying idea of him saying, like, oh, the black college, it's almost like him saying the black college where you belong. I think that's just, again, really powerful writing. And in addition to that, that's also, like, I can't say enough how much I love the writing in this episode. So in that scene, when Dorian asks, why, or when he asks Dorian, when Lasky asks Dorian why he pulled him over, Dorian says, 'cause he was going too fast. And Lasky says, since you admitted it, I'll let that go. And that's just dripping with subtext. Like, that is just incredibly powerful writing, again, because on one hand, you have the metaphor of, like, the institutional racism of our society asking the young black man why this racist entity is stopping him from going to college, and Dorian says, because I was going too fast. And it's like this powerful metaphor of, like, the society we live in, the institutional racism. I'm going to say that so many times in this episode. I'm sorry for the repetition, but that's what I'm locking into in this episode. But the idea of institutional racism and the idea that, it will stop young minorities from advancing in our society because they're going too fast. They're not going the speed that our culture has been ingrained into keeping them from going. And add to that the additional layer of Lasky saying, since you admitted it, I'll let that go. Just that also has just this underlying tone of just control. Like, Lasky feels like he has this sense of control over them, this sense of power that he's lording over them. Like, since you admitted it, and it's such a, I don't want to say polite, because that's too kind a word for it, but it's like this, it's under this veneer of not even respect, just this veneer of like this idea of him just cutting him a break. Like, since you admitted it, I'll let that go because I have this power over you that I can dictate whether you're free or in jail. And since you are kind enough to admit that you are in the wrong, I will just let that slide. Like, it's just again, that tone of just control and power that he has over them is just palpable and just really powerful. So the scene gives us our first of a few scenes where Lasky demands that the camera be turned off. And I love this as a running theme throughout the episode. Lasky, again, represents the racist institutions of society and the entities in our society that are keeping minorities from advancing or trying their best to prevent minorities from having a voice in our society. So anytime the camera is on him, the camcorder is on him, he switches. Like, he becomes belligerent and almost robot-like when he's being recorded. It's this incredibly incisive depiction of racist authority desperately wanting to hide its face from the world and operate in a world where it can thrive without accountability. It sets up the power of the ending of the episode with the filming of the cops incredibly well, because filming the police is robbing the racism that it's embodying of its power to, lord over the minorities of our culture. And it's incredibly powerful the way that Lasky just switches. Like, he becomes belligerent and like I said, it's almost robot-like in the way that he says it. It's very much like it's basically what you see in videos like this. It's like, oh, turn the camera off and everything. It's like, it's racist entities not wanting to be held accountable for their actions. So at this point, Nina rewinds the video. She's freaking out. She rewinds the video, and we get it backed up to them in the car. So Nina freaks out and everything, and she's wondering, like, where's the cop and everything, and Dorian's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So Dorian pulls over, and my God, this episode's amazing. So he pulls over, and, like, I think it's in the exact same spot that they were pulled over before, and that's when Lasky returns. And a couple things about this. First of all, I love how the overhead shot of them pulling over and the police car pulling up, like, that overhead shot mirrors the first one where Lasky's pulling them over in the first, the scene that I just described. It mirrors it. However, in this instance, the camera position, or our perspective, is from a significantly higher position in the sky than the previous scene. So it's a great way to show us both how isolated they are and how much, like, Dorian and Nina are on their own, and, like, there's no one around that's going to help them except for this racist cop. And it also gives us this subtle, like, increase in tension in that regard, because like, we know that they're alone, and it's like we're seeing it from an even higher level, and it's just, I don't know, there's kind of a mental kind of thing that happens. I can't articulate it, but it just made me feel like, oh, this is going to be even more intense. And sure enough, every interaction with Lasky is an escalation from the previous one, and it's remarkable. So, speaking about the escalation of that, this scene, it's a completely different context from the original scene with Lasky pulling them over. And this shows like how, like, the disparity between the racist authority figure and the African American characters. In this, it demonstrates that the racist entity, the institutional racism, doesn't view them as people. Like, he sees them for their infraction on the law. Like, here, he again sounds like a robot also. And when he pulls up, like, Dorian's like, oh, thank God, we need help. She's having something's happening to her. We need to get her to the hospital. Perfectly, like, reasonable request, clearly demonstrating that he is in a frantic situation where his mother is having a potential medical emergency. But Lasky's his first thing was that, oh, your car, like, you see the tire, it's on the highway, it needs to be moved. Because, like I said, he just sees them for their infraction on the law. And he sounds even more robotic. So, not acknowledging, and like, he doesn't even acknowledge what to them is a potential medical emergency. Instead, he's immediately just exerting his power over them. And again, it's important to note here that, again, I don't believe this episode is as clear-cut as cops versus African Americans. It is absolutely 100% a metaphor for racism in general, and how racist people and racist institutions, how their only goal is to subjugate African Americans and impede them in any way possible. Like, it is a metaphor, and I'm afraid that people are going to see this episode and think like, oh, it's just, bad-mouthing cops and everything, which I think is just a complete, patently untrue statement, and completely reductive of what this episode is all about. So Dorian has some pushback, obviously, because Lasky is not acknowledging that they are in the midst of a medical emergency. And so Lasky's response is, again, the writing so powerful. He says, I will address your situation once you've complied with my demand to move your vehicle. It's so aggressive and threatening in tone, but it sounds so much like what you would hear in any of the Black Lives Matters videos that you can see on YouTube. Like, it's so, it's powerful. So this whole sequence culminates with Lasky pulling out his taser. Nina reacts in absolute terror, almost as much as if he were to draw his gun, his actual, like, revolver on Dorian. And so she presses rewind and changes their route in the hopes that, or I think at this point she rewinds all the way back to the diner. So they get up, leave, and Nina changes their route in the hopes that they'll avoid Lasky. And here's where we get another cool Twilight Zone reference. They pass by a sign when she whips the car around and goes down a different route. They pass a sign saying Old Cadwallader Inn, which is a reference to Escape Clause from season 1. And it, I like that it's for, like, an inn, and it, like, that sign has an image of a person laying in bed, and it reminds me of bedridden Walter Bedecker at the beginning of Escape Clause. I thought that was a nice touch. So, Nina's freaking out. She's shaken up and everything, and Dorian's asking, like, why they're taking this route, and she says, like, it's a different path. It's not as risky and everything. It's safer. And so Dorian says, you're right. I'm taking a risky path. I want to do something good in this world, like you've done for me. I want to inspire this generation with my films. As crazy as that sounds, you always made me feel like I could do anything. You're the strongest person I know. Absolutely beautiful. Like that. I love that so much. And, like, the mother-son bond between Dorian and Nina in this episode is so freaking strong. And, like, that scene, like, the way that Damson Idris delivers that line. It's just so genuine and just so, like, you can sense the admiration that he has for her, because she's a person that throughout his entire life, she has worked hard to provide for him and provide for herself and everything, and to, make sure that he has this opportunity. And like, you just feel that admiration that he has for her. And I love that so much. So after this, they go to the motel, and because Nina's like, I can't drive back tonight. I don't feel well. Let's just get a motel. Go to a motel. We'll eat junk food. We'll watch trashy TV, and it's our last night together before you go to college. Let's just have a nice night where we just goof off. And so they're in the motel room, and the lottery scene again, like, the writing, I love this. The lottery scene is really sweet in that it showcases Nina's complete devotion to her son. Like, she's about to send her son off to college. She's about to be on her own for the first time in 18 years. And she has this power to rewind time. But at no point in this entire episode does she use that power for personal gain. And this is such a beautiful example, having a scene where she is literally watching the lottery be drawn. But she doesn't use that power to gain, like, get money. She doesn't rewind it to go get a lottery ticket and win the lottery. Instead, she uses that to share a moment with her son. It's just so incredibly sweet. Like, she records it and she rewinds it, and then she says, "Hey, if I can guess what the numbers are, you have to promise me that you'll come visit your mom anytime you're able to." It's such a sweet idea, because Dorian's at that age where he's becoming more and more of a man, and by doing that, he will need his mother less and less. And I feel like there's an underlying, like, fear that she has, that, like, on the more overt level, like, she has this intense fear of losing her son to, being killed and everything. But the lottery, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like that was really sweet. And the lottery drawing is a fun way for Nina to still surprise him. Like, he's so gobsmacked by it, but I'll get to that in a second. But anyway, the lottery numbers, 6, 8, 20, and 16, I feel like that is a reference to a specific date. Don't know the significance of it. Couldn't find anything. I looked up June 8th, 2016. June 8th, 2016, Black Lives Matter, if it was had a tie to that, to the movement. I couldn't find anything. I even thought for a second, like, well, maybe it's not June 8th, maybe it's August 6th, like, the rest of the world sees dates. But I couldn't find anything there either. So I don't know. If you know what the 6, 8, 20, and 16 is a reference to, if anything, please let me know, because that was something I was completely in the dark about. So, before she rewinds, Dorian is talking about how the Big Bang happened and how everything is just particles floating to wherever they're destined to be, and that things happen and they happen the way that they should. First of all, I think that kind of speaks to the arrogance of youth, that Dorian says these philosophical musings in such a just nonchalant tone. I like that, but it's worth mentioning at this point in the episode, I thought that was signaling to us that this episode was going to take on a universe, destiny, fate storyline. And I thought that it was going to be about Nina preventing Dorian's death and realizing that it has to happen. Like, there's no way to prevent it. I'm so glad that the episode didn't take that route, because as much as I like that as a concept, or I like that idea as a concept, like the whole fate versus free will and how we're kind of bound by what we are experiencing, and there's no way to change that. Like, that's something, because I love time travel in general. That's something, like, I'm just very curious about in film and television. But I'm so glad that they didn't go that route, because I've seen that before. And what they do in this episode is a much more original and more personal take. Yeah, so she rewinds the video. This is the only time she uses the camera for personal use, and it's to just have a fun, like, to kind of pull one over on her son. And just, I love the chemistry here. Again, I love it, because, like, Dorian is like blown away by it. He's like, how did you do that? Like, what, like, how'd you do, like, he's so impressed and everything. And he's like, it's a fun moment. It's great. I love it. But, he goes to get snacks and everything. And then, Lasky shows up at the door. So that raised a little bit of a question for me. And I'm curious if anyone took that a certain way. It made me wonder, does using the camcorder summon Lasky? It doesn't feel like that kind of episode. And it doesn't feel like I think that might be the only case where he comes up out of nowhere. I'm glad that there's not like an overt like reference to like, okay, this is like her use of the camcorder is summoning this entity that's chasing her. I'm glad it didn't go that route, because it would have been fitting with the Twilight Zone to have this thing like in another in a most unusual camera. Their use of it is their downfall, because they're using it for personal gain. She doesn't use the camcorder for personal gain or anything like that. She's using it to protect her and her son. And I feel like that's kind of the underlying message of the plot device of the camcorder. But anyway, so to sum up that really, crazy point that I tried to struggle through. I don't think the camcorder summons Lasky, but it does seem to lock Nina and Lasky in this Twilight Zone struggle. Like they're at odds, in kind of a mystical fashion. So anyway, at this scene, Dorian goes off screen and he to get snacks, but he says off screen that someone's out here. And I want to signal out Sanaa Lathan's performance here. She takes a beat, she breathes deeply a couple times and prepares herself, because she knows it's him. And anyone, like, in this scenario, you think, like, there's no reason for the police officer to be there. And again, he is a stand-in for the racist institutions of our society. So just the fact that someone is outside of their motel room signals to her, like, this is racism coming after her and her son. Lasky is the embodiment, he's the personification of the fear, danger, and oppression that she has felt her entire life as a black woman. And she doesn't need to see that Lasky is there, because her life has been her trying to escape what Lasky represents. And I feel like that's just an incredibly powerful moment in the episode. And she feels she'll never be free of it and fears Dorian won't as well. And that's kind of her character summed up entirely. And it's summed up beautifully in just this close shot of her on the bed, like hearing this and processing it in like a 3 or 4 second moment. It's very powerful filmmaking. I loved it. And what makes this whole thing so heart-wrenching, this entire episode so maddening also, because it's 2019. We should live in a place where, this kind of thing isn't happening. But it is, and it's heart-wrenching. But what's so heart-wrenching about this particular situation in particular is that she does everything right, in italics. The majority of the episode, she is the embodiment of what people who naively deny the Black Lives Matter movement say. Like there's this whole idea within, certain circles, people that support law enforcement. I come from a law enforcement family, so I've heard this kind of thing over and over again. Like, people naively thinking, like, okay, well, don't act suspicious, don't antagonize the police officer, and you won't have anything to worry about. Same thing with, like, when, the Patriot Act was going on, like, under Bush, like, oh, well, if you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't be worried about it. It's like, that's not the point. It's like, I don't know. Anyway, all that's just, it's bullshit, but she is doing what society tells her she should be doing. And it still continues the escalation of their encounters with Lasky. And this time it becomes more violent, with unholstering his taser again and actually physically smashing Dorian against the framed picture. But anyway, the way that he addresses them in the hallway, and the way that he completely like dresses down Nina when she says that Dorian is her son. Like it's, oh my God, the writing. So he says, like he asks for their names, and she says, I'm Nina Harrison, and Dorian says, I'm Dorian Harrison. And, he asks what his relation is to Nina, and Nina says, he's my son. And his response is, ma'am, I asked this boy. And the use of the word boy just makes my skin crawl. And that's intentional. Like it's supposed to in this episode. So at this point, Nina is kind of all too ready to comply with Lasky. He asks for their identification, and she tells him like it's in his back pocket. Dorian's identification is in his wallet in his back pocket. And that's, saying that it's telling him where it is so that when Dorian reaches for it, he doesn't think he's pulling a weapon. And I like that inclusion there. But when she is kind of going for her purse, or for her identification, Dorian fights back because he's 100% right. There's no grounds for them to turn over their IDs. There's no reason for him to be there. Like he says that they got a complaint about noise or whatever from the motel room. And I don't know. It's clearly harassment, and Dorian calls him out for that. And what the episode demonstrates so well is how much of a gulf there is between their rights and his authority. And I love that. Or I love the way that, like, the message that it's conveying in this episode. It's thought-provoking. So Lasky freaks out at the camcorder again, smashes Dorian against a picture. Nina rewinds. This time, they're back at the diner, and Nina actually approaches Lasky in the diner and tries to talk to him. And she's polite and trying to get on his good side. And this is one of the most important scenes in the entire episode. It's Nina's attempt to humanize Lasky and her attempt to bridge the gap that is so ingrained in him. However, it's all for naught, because Lasky's racist. He's the embodiment of racist institutions that are in our society today. He won't change, and you can't win people over with a piece of pie. And that's the shameful truth of what this episode is saying. Racism, discrimination, profiling, they're all so ingrained in our society. They've been ingrained in our society over decades and decades that it's hard to change that. And to attempt to change one person at a time is kind of a fool's errand, as sad as that is. And just his racist behavior is so subtle in the way it's depicted. He doesn't shake her hand because he has a holstered weapon, which on one hand, I don't buy that at all. I think it was just an excuse not to touch her. And on the other hand, it may have been born from him not trusting her and thinking she would reach for his weapon. Either thought is ridiculous, preposterous, and completely inherently racist. In the casual way that he throws around his racism, saying, I know everyone like you. Glenn Fleshler does such a great job in this episode. His, 99% of Lasky's dialogue is in a generic cop voice. And I mean that as such a compliment to the writing and to the performance of Glenn Fleshler, because it reinforces that he is a stand-in for racism in general in our society and everything. He is this robotic entity, and it's something that is pervasive throughout all of our culture. And so they share this moment, like the one moment where she almost reaches him is when he implies that his wife is dead. And she shows compassion. And in that moment, it's like he's trying to read her, like his mind is trying to figure out what she means, because she might as well be like an alien to him. Because she is a different race. So they have that moment. He thanks her for the pie. It's still fraught with tension, but Nina walks away thinking that she has reached him and that everything's going to be fine. Then the other shoe drops, and he asks her about the car. And I love the way that scene is shot. It's kind of I referenced earlier when he is sitting at the counter and she's filming Dorian, and they have like this thing where in the background they're in focus in the booth and he's out of focus in the forefront. it's it's a similar shot in this scene because he is in the background, out of focus, and she's in the foreground, completely in focus. And in that moment, he is the embodiment, again, of every racist white person she has encountered in her life who thinks that her race should dictate the type of life she has. And this really racist idea that, oh, because you're a black woman, you shouldn't have a nice car. You shouldn't have it made. You should be oppressed. And she, at this point, she's biting back at him and that implication, saying that she worked hard to get where she is and to get her son to college. And like she has this outburst, and then she tries to reel it back by saying, we all want that for our kids, don't we? And it's still this kind of biting thing, but it's just a really incredible read of the line by her that it's really powerful. So we get outside the diner. Lasky's license plate reads 01015, which is a reference to Flight 1015 from Nightmare, which I'm curious if that's going to be kind of a running thing throughout the episodes, but I don't know. So Lasky confronts her in the parking lot, and he is demanding her identification, her driver's license, proof of insurance, and proof of ownership. And she fights back at him. Like, this is the point where her reaction to Lasky, her and Dorian's reaction to Lasky are swapped. She fights back. She gets angry, and Dorian is taking on her attitude where it's like, okay, well, I can prove it here. Like, it's fine. Let's just do what he says. But she's angry. Like, she says, like, who carries their pink slip with them? Like, who carries who has that? And he's saying, like, well, you better have it because you're not leaving this parking lot without proving to me that you own this vehicle. And it's just, it's so, aggravating. So Dorian says it's fine. I have a picture of the pink slip on my phone, which, real quickly, if I'm allowed one nitpick in this episode, it would be that Dorian saying that he has a picture of the pink slip on his phone feels just a little bit contrived. It just seems kind of weird. Like, okay, they need the pink slip. He suddenly has it on his phone. It's weird. But it doesn't detract from the episode. It's fine. So he gets into the car to grab his phone, and when he comes out, he shows the phone, and Lasky pulls out his gun, shoots him in the chest. Now I come from a police family. My family is police. Like, my brothers, they're police officers. I have friends that are police officers. My dad was a police officer. My mom works for the police department as a civilian, but previous to that, in like the 70s and 80s, she worked as a dispatcher. Like, I come from a police family. And I think that this scenario, this situation, like, in general terms, is a hard one to dissect in real life because there are a lot of variables and whatnot. Like, it's something, it's a tricky subject matter to handle, honestly. But here it's done well. Like, it's a well done well done depiction of that abhorrent and terrifying situation. So Dorian's shot, and then we get an act break, and we come back, and there's this scene where we get this kind of heightened reality dream sequence that's showing Nina, Dorian, and Dorian's daughter, and maybe his son too, I think, playing in this field with bubbles, before flashing to Nina crying outside the morgue before she's about to identify Dorian. Visually, it's beautiful and heartbreaking, and like, I was a little confused, or not confused, but I wondered if it really fit within the episode, because it's the only scene like that. But I like the way it was done. Like, it fits well enough. Like, I like how the focus shifts throughout the sequence. And it gives, like, that kind of effect gives it this dreamlike quality that's, kind of hammers home the pain that she feels. So she rewinds when she gets into the morgue, and she rewinds the camcorder. And she's not sure that it'll work in that moment, which, I think it's fine. It's maybe not shaky because she did drop the camcorder, but she has like this silent like moment where she's like, please take me back. Please take me back. And she rewinds, and when she sees Dorian at the booth, when she comes back, she's so happy and everything, and then they need to get out of there. They see Lasky at the door, Well, first, let me say that when they're leaving the diner, I love the imagery of the two of them walking through that narrow hallway of the diner and toward the door. And on the left-hand side, they're passing the American flag on the left on the wall. And Dorian looks back over his shoulder at the diner as soon as the flag is out of the frame. And I just think that's great imagery because the diner is the quintessential symbol of Americana and everything. And it's just, it was a nice like moment where he's looking back and she's trying to, escape, the diner and everything. So when they're driving, Nina's crying in the car. Dorian thinking it's maybe because she's sad that he's going away to college. I think that was, it tracks well. And then at that moment, Nina says that she's asking him for help. She's bringing him into the fold and asking him for help. And he says, "You never ask for help." And I don't know. I kind of think that what the episode's saying about Nina in that moment as a character is that she has been on her own ever since she left home. And maybe similar to how Lasky is representative of the oppressiveness of racism, Nina is representative of the African American community. And her arc throughout this entire episode is to realize that the way to overcome the oppression is to band together as a community. I could be completely off base, but that's my read on it. So she comes clean to him, and I really like they pull over and she comes clean to him. And I just want to say, I really love the locations in this episode. Like, it's very desolate, kind of just open country and everything. So they're talking, and then they're trying to figure it out, and Dorian says there's nothing magical about knowing the only way we haven't taken can get us to school. And he's saying that basically the only route that they haven't taken in this whole experience is the route that goes through Uncle Neil's house, because it's the only way that they haven't gone. And here's where the episode reaches kind of a completely different level. Like, it brings us into the third act, and it gets into a whole other level. But first, they pass by the sign, on the way to Neil's. And first of all, the university he's going to is called Tennyson University. And apparently it's a reference to the main character in the original Twilight Zone episode, The Silence, which I haven't seen yet, but I'm going to be covering it in about a month or so if I keep up my output. And also I want to point out that when they pass that sign that says Tennyson University, I think it also says Earlysville or whatever, which I don't know what that reference is again. But when they pass the sign on the way to Neil's, there's also a small sign that says Corrigan Men's Club, and I kind of feel like that may be a reference to Pete Corrigan, the character from Back There, which is also a time travel episode. So Neil lives in this quiet neighborhood, and Nina reveals to Dorian while they're outside the house that it's where her older brothers lost their lives. And she references that one of them was shot right over there. And she tells him that, like Dorian says, and you haven't been back. And she says, to me, there was only two ways out: walking out and never looking back, or dying. And when Neil comes out, he references kind of the gentrification of the neighborhood, that they just built a stadium nearby and they've been pushing everyone out any way that they can. And at this point, we get our second Black Panther reference, which I love. He mentions to Dorian that he has a first issue Black Panther comic in mint condition, and don't mess it up. So Neil has a scene with Nina where he references that she didn't come back for their father's funeral. And at this point, I kind of wish that there was more explored about her history. This is a 45-minute episode. I think for the most part, it's a pretty well-paced episode, but I kind of wish that there was a little bit more to her backstory and her history with her family. But we get plenty, so it's pretty fine. So at this point, there's a reference where, actually, I think it comes a little bit later, where he mentions, the Remembrance Project that he's doing. It's, kind of feels like an allegory for slavery and displacement of African Americans. Like, he's documenting the Black people who have lived in that neighborhood who are being moved out because of the gentrification. And that takes us into a whole other scenario of the episode. This allegory for slavery and displacement includes like a visual kind of reference to the Underground Railroad. And I think that's an incredible place to take the episode. But I'll get to that in a second. So, there's a sign in there's a bunch of stuff on his walls. Like, we get the Black Lives Matter, writing on it. And he mentions that he's been documenting everyone that lives in the neighborhood, their stories and everything. So anyway, Nina tells him about the camcorder, and he stops her and says that he believes her. And there's this kind of family connection that they have that I really appreciated in the episode. And so they're kind of formulating their plan. And he says, they always come. Question is, what are we going to do? And that's when he references the Remembrance Project. And he has a map that shows like how they're going to go under the radar to escape this cop. And it took me a second to really understand what was going on. I wasn't sure about this whole secret trip to take Dorian to school until it just clicked for me. Like, this is the Underground Railroad. This is them escaping slavery and bondage and everything. Like, this is them escaping that. So it's really brief. I kind of feel like, well, no, it's done. It's done enough. It gets the point across. And it doesn't feel disjointed to me or anything, but they arrive at the college, and I love the music when they come out of the like storm door thing. It's just upbeat and hopeful. Like, this is the end of their journey. When they walk up toward the gate, I do want to point out there was a white man in a black suit with his back to the camera that he's holding a cigarette in his hand. I felt like that was a nice nod to Serling. And also, I'm glad that hasn't been in every episode. Like, I hope that this is the only time we see that. Like, I could see them thinking like, oh, that'd be cool to have that in every episode of the show going forward. But I'm glad that it's not the case. So they walk up to the gate, and that's when they get the final confrontation between Nina and Lasky. So Lasky pulls up and says, hey, you three stop there. Neil goes up to him, and stands like right in front of the gun and says no, like, just no, officer, you're not going to stop us. And Lasky says, I can't remember exactly what he says at first, but he says, I'm going to explain to you how this is supposed to go. Because again, he's the embodiment of every racist institution in our society. And this is the status quo of how it's supposed to be from decades of ingrained racism and within our society. So then we get the final confrontation between Nina and Lasky. She chooses not to rewind it. And instead records the police officer, and who is now accompanied by a squad of cops that show up. And in here again, it makes me nervous. And again, I'm kind of speaking into the vacuum because I haven't seen the response that this episode's gotten, but it makes me nervous that people will view this episode in a literal sense, like thinking that, oh, this is about cops versus African Americans, but it's not. It's bigger than that. It's more metaphorical than that. It's more of a metaphor than that. So Nina films the cops, and the people at the college start to film, and just the imagery of that is powerful. It brings home the arc of her being just a lone person in this world, and reaching out to the community, and how it's telling the story that, like, the way to overcome these racist institutions is to band together and become a community yourself, and affect change through showing that there needs to be accountability for the racists of the world and the racism in the world. So she tells him that we're all witnesses here, and you can't do this. So he says, Lasky says, you think you can intimidate me with a camcorder? Have you watched the news? Or do you watch the news, or whatever he said? And she says, you've crossed the line, harassing us, abusing authority, profiling us, following us, shooting us, killing us. Now we cross the line. My son will cross that gate. My son will go to college. So back the fuck up. And at this point, okay, I don't have kids. I don't have kids. I never watched the Twilight Zone growing up, as the whole point of this podcast. So framing what I'm about to say that way, the foul language in these episodes hasn't bothered me. Like, there's been kind of a, not outcry, but there's been disappointment within people who've watched the Twilight Zone who are fans of the original that there is foul language in these episodes. And up until this point, it hasn't bothered me at all, but it also hasn't added anything to the show. So I totally understand where people are coming from saying like, okay, well, I can't watch this show with my kids the way that my parents watched it with me when I was a kid, because it has like all this vulgarity that's just thrown out there. Like the way that, in The Comedian, like Dee Dee says to suck on her vagina. Like that's just too coarse and too foul for what the show should be. So, up until this point, the language hasn't bothered me because I'm watching it as an adult who doesn't have kids and probably won't have kids. But when Nina says "back the fuck up," there is so much power behind that F-bomb that it makes me glad that they're doing that. Like, I can respect people not liking the use of vulgar language and everything, but here it fits so well because it packs that power. And I'm someone who, like, I don't care. Like, I curse and everything, but it's not, like, on my podcast I try not to, because I feel like I kind of feel like it lessens the power of it. There's actually a great Parks and Rec joke where Leslie's talking to the camera and says, I don't like to use the word butthead, because I think if you call everyone a butthead, it loses its power. But Tom is acting like a real dick. I love that. I watched that episode today, but that kind of embodies my position on like cursing on podcasts. Like, you know, fine. If that's how you talk, that's fine. But I personally don't. I try not to, because I want more power behind it. So when I say it, it's like, okay, well, I'm not just saying, oh, fuck this. I'm saying like, no, fuck this, because this is something that I don't like. Anyway, that kind of got away from me. So, when Nina and Lasky are talking, there are a couple of shots. Like, there's one shot with Neil and Lasky, and then another shot with Nina and Lasky when Nina comes up to confront him. It cuts to like a crane shot where it's like obviously in the sky, and it's from outside of the gate, or inside of the gate, I should say, of the school. And one of the like circles in the gate is positioned in a way that like the characters are inside the circle. And I tweeted this with screenshots and everything, so check it out on OV Anthology Pod on Twitter. But I think that like that's a very cool potential callback to Nick of Time. Because when the couple walk into the diner in that original episode, the camera is positioned inside the diner and zoomed in on the door. And as they walk in, it zooms out and it shows that like it's actually the camera is behind this kind of wooden divider that's like crossed. So they're actually inside the divider. And as it zooms out, you see like, oh, there's a divider between the camera and the characters as they're walking in. And it's just like, it's a great like visual metaphor for like them being kind of like they're going to be trapped, potentially trapped in the episode. And, I love the way that that's, you know, referenced in here. Again, maybe I'm reaching because it is kind of a different situation. And maybe it's just a coincidence, but if it's an homage, I really appreciated it. Because I just think I love that visual, technique. So, anyway, so the cops back down, they leave, Dorian goes to college, and Neil says like, damn sis, and then like that's the end of that. So we flash forward to 10 years later. Nina, Dorian, and Dorian's daughter Trinity are in the house. And so this ending, it's both heartbreaking and hopeful and powerful. We see Nina still has the camcorder and she's recording every day. And she's doing that in fear that those in authority will take everything she has away from her. Like, even though she stood up to Lasky and she made her stand, and she had that community behind her and everything, she still lives in fear that everything's going to be taken away from her. And that's heartbreaking in and of itself. And Dorian is trying to convince her, like, it's not needed, it's fine. Like, why you're recording every day? And she's like, you know why. But like, I love this ending so much because it's Trinity who grabs the camcorder and she's playing with it, and then she drops it and it shatters. And like, I feel like that's just a really powerful statement. Like I mentioned earlier that the kind of generational differences between how these characters interact with the conventions of racism and the institutionalized racism in our society. There's a difference between how each of these characters do it because there's a generational divide, but it takes, so like the implication is that it takes generations to invoke change and to break through this oppression. Nina's one generation. She's fearful. She's supplicant to the wills of those in authority because she fears that she and everyone she loves is going to be killed and going to be destroyed by it. Dorian is idealistic. He came of age in a time where it's encouraged to question authority, and it's the start of this whole revolution. So he bites back. He fights back, and he questions like what the logic is behind it because he knows that racism is bad. He hasn't racism doesn't have the controlling hold that it does. But it's Trinity's generation that may still truly break through and live in a better and safer world than her father and grandmother. And that's embodied by the fact that she drops the camcorder, shatters it so they don't have that crutch, or they don't need that power anymore. And it's a beautifully done thing. It's incredibly moving, very profound, very powerful, and I love the episode for that. And so the episode kind of closes with Dorian leaving to go get ice cream, and when he goes to the door and he leaves, I was so, like, in my head, I was begging the show not to let anything happen to him, like, and I'm really glad that it didn't end in some devastation or anything. Like, this is as heavy and intense as the subject matter is, it's a somewhat hopeful ending. But then Peele's closing narration is profound in and of itself. It's amazing. It shows that Nina will never truly be free of the fear that she feels. And I love the way that as he's talking, as Peele is narrating, the police lights are kind of flashing on just half of her face. And then right at the end, like, we get a brief siren sound after the narration. I thought that was a wonderful touch to end the episode on, kind of closing the book on this episode, but leaving it open to be a thought-provoking and profound statement on our society and on the culture we live in. That does it for the episode. I ran really long. Holy crap. So, that's kind of cool. That reminded me, anyway, it's 1:41 p.m. and I've, like, in the recording, it's 1 hour and 41 minutes. That just reminded me of Justin in Nightmare at 30,000 Feet. So anyway, that's my review of Replay. It's an incredible episode. And by the way, the closing credits of the episodes, I failed to mention the first two, but I want to highlight them here. The closing credits, I haven't been watching them because I don't watch the teasers and everything, but I did watch the previous ones. I love that the closing credits of the episodes are straight out of the original series, down to the music. It shows just a frame of the episode, and then plays the music as the credits roll. It's exactly like the original series. I love this reboot for that. Yeah, so that's my review of Replay. Let me know what you thought. And yeah, I that'll do it for this episode. Next time on the podcast, on the main feed, I'm going to be reviewing Mr. Dingle the Strong, Burgess Meredith's return to the Twilight Zone. And then I will also be reviewing A Traveler, which is episode 4 of the Twilight Zone 2019. Let me know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of Replay, what you think about the Twilight Zone reboot and everything. And yeah, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening, and see you next time.
Anthology is edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. For a full archive of our episodes, go to anthologypod.com/archive. You can also like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod and follow the show on Twitter at OVAnthologyPod. If you enjoy the show, please take a couple minutes to leave us a rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts. This is the easiest way to support what we do, and all it costs is a little bit of your time. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, you can make a PayPal donation at anthologypod.com/donate or support us on Patreon for recurring donations and access to commentary tracks and B-roll audio recorded exclusively for patrons at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Every donation goes toward paying the fees to keep the podcast running and is greatly appreciated. Official Anthology merch, including shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more, can be found in the Obsessive Viewers TeePublic store. You can find a link to the store in the show notes of this episode and at anthologypod.com/donate. Or you can simply search for Obsessive Viewer at tpublic.com. For information about the Obsessive Viewers annual live event showcasing short horror films from local filmmakers, check out shocktoberinirvington.com. And for an archive of all our events, as well as news about potential future events, head over to obsessiveviewer.com/live. For more podcast content, you can find our flagship movie and TV review and discussion show, The Obsessive Viewer Podcast, at obsessiveviewer.com, and on Twitter at obsessiveviewer. You can also find Tower Junkies, a podcast where Matt and co-host Tiny share their love of all things Stephen King and his magnum opus, the Dark Tower series, over at towerjunkiespod.com and at towerjunkiespod on Twitter. And finally, check out The Secular Perspective, Tiny's side project podcast, which tackles current events and life's big questions from the perspective of secular hosts Chad and Amanda at thesecularperspective.com. Bumper music for this podcast comes courtesy of As Good As It Gets, which can be found at facebook.com/asgoodasitgetsband. You can also find As Good As It Gets music on Spotify, Google Play, and iTunes. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.